My daughter called at 7:14 inches the morning to tell me the cruise was still happening. What she forgot to mention was that my name was no longer on the passenger list. I had already paid for every cabin, so I called the cruise line, introduced myself as the sole account holder, and requested a full cancellation. They were somewhere over the Atlantic when the ship's concierge informed them that their staterooms no longer existed. That is how it ended. Let me tell you how it began. My name is Dorothy Mae Calloway. I am 64 years old, and I have lived in Savannah, Georgia for most of my life. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse at Memorial Health, the kind of work that teaches you early that the human body is fragile, that time is not promised, and that the people who show up at 3 in the morning are the ones who truly love you. My husband, Robert, showed up every single time. When I worked double shifts, he left soup on the stove with a note that said, "Warm this before midnight or I'll worry." He drove 40 minutes in a rainstorm to bring me dry shoes when a pipe burst in the break room. When our daughter was born, he cried in a way I had never seen a man cry before, not out of weakness, but out of wonder. Robert passed away 4 years ago from a heart attack that came without warning on a Tuesday afternoon. He was in the garden when it happened. I found him beside the rose bush he had planted the year we moved in. His hand was still holding the pruning shears. After he was gone, I made a promise to myself. The quiet kind that doesn't require witnesses. I would take our family on the trip he had always talked about. A cruise, a big one. He used to fold down the corners of travel magazines and circle itineraries with a red pen. Caribbean routes, mostly. He wanted to stand on a deck and watch the sun melt into the water. He never got the chance. So I made it my mission. I started setting money aside the month after his funeral. Not in a jar this time. Robert had always told me to be smarter than that, so I opened a dedicated savings account I called the Family Voyage Fund. I moved $200 into it every month without fail. When I started picking up per diem nursing shifts at the clinic downtown, I put every cent of that into the account too. I clipped coupons for groceries. I stopped coloring my hair at the salon and bought the box instead. I wore the same winter coat for 3 years, even when the lining started to separate at the seams. Little sacrifices, invisible to everyone but me. By the time I had enough, I had saved a little over $19,000. I called a travel agent named Pauline, a woman I had known since our children were in middle school together, and I told her I wanted to book a 7-night Caribbean cruise for 12 people. 2 families, 1 reunion. My daughter and her husband. Their 3 children. My son-in-law's parents. My son and his girlfriend. My great-aunt Cecile, who was 81 and had never left the state of Georgia, and me. Pauline helped me book 3 connecting staterooms and 1 balcony cabin, which I reserved for Cecile because she deserved the view more than anyone. I paid the deposit in full the same afternoon. I organized the flight connections from 2 different cities. I arranged a van transfer from the port. I bought matching luggage tags in navy and gold that said Calloway Family Voyage 2025. I mailed them to each family with a handwritten note. I had never felt more like Robert was watching me from somewhere good. What I did not know was that while I was planning the trip of our lives, my daughter had been planning something else entirely. The first sign came at Easter dinner. My daughter and her husband had driven up from Brunswick, and we were sitting around the table when her husband mentioned, casually, that his sister was thinking of taking a cruise this summer. My daughter smiled at the tablecloth. She did not look at me. I noticed but said nothing because I am the kind of woman who gives people the room to explain themselves before assuming the worst. The second sign came 3 weeks later when I called to confirm dietary restrictions for the cruise booking. I reached my daughter on the first ring, which was unusual. She sounded distracted. When I mentioned adding a gluten-free note for her youngest, she paused just a beat too long and said, "Oh yes, right, the cruise, go ahead," as if I had called to remind her of an appointment she had half forgotten. The third sign I missed completely. That one is the one I think about now. It was a Sunday afternoon, 6 weeks before departure. I was on the porch sorting through the final confirmation documents Pauline had emailed me. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter. It said, "Mom, just a heads up. Marcus's sister ended up booking the same ship. Small world." I replied with a heart emoji and went back to my papers. I did not ask which sailing. I did not ask which cabin deck. I should have asked. The text that changed everything came on a Wednesday evening at 9:47. I remember the time because I had just finished watching the news and was about to turn off the kitchen light. My phone lit up on the counter. It was from my daughter. "Mom, I have been meaning to talk to you about this, and I know it's late, but I didn't know how to bring it up sooner. Marcus's sister Renee booked the same cruise, and she's bringing her family. There are only so many connecting rooms on that deck, and we've been thinking it would be so much nicer for the kids to have both cousins together. It would just flow better if Renee's family took the rooms you booked for us and your side of things. You understand, right? You're always so understanding. It's not a big deal. You'll still be there. It's just reorganized." I read that message 4 times. Each time I reached the end, I felt something different. The first read brought confusion. The second brought a cold, spreading clarity. The third brought something that sat low in my chest, like a stone dropped into still water. The fourth time, I set the phone face down on the counter, walked slowly to Robert's armchair in the living room, and sat in it the way I used to when I needed to feel him near me. Reorganized. She had called it reorganized. What she meant was that I had been moved, not uninvited. Shuffled to the periphery of the trip I had designed, funded, and dreamed into existence for 4 years. Her husband's sister and her husband's sister's children would take the staterooms I had chosen and paid for, and I was supposed to understand because I was always so understanding. I did not call her that night. I did not text back. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and opened my laptop. I pulled up the cruise line's passenger management portal. Pauline had given me the login credentials as the primary account holder. I scrolled through the booking summary. 12 passengers, 3 staterooms, 1 balcony cabin, all under Dorothy May Calloway, all paid, all mine. I looked at it for a long time. Then I opened a new tab and began making a different kind of list. I thought about Gloria, from my old nursing unit, who had retired the same year I did and spent most of her days volunteering at the food pantry because, she once told me, it gave her somewhere to go. I thought about my neighbor, Ruth, who had raised 4 children by herself and whose youngest had moved to Seattle without leaving a forwarding address. I thought about my friend Hazel from church, who turned 70 last year and celebrated alone because she said she didn't want to make a fuss, which everyone in the congregation knew meant nobody had offered to make a fuss for her. I thought about Mei Lin, who had been my closest friend at the hospital for 15 years and who told me once, while we were eating lunch in the break room, that she had never in her adult life taken a vacation that was just for her. I thought about my great-aunt Cecile, who I had already booked a balcony cabin for, who had sent me a voice message when she received her luggage tag that made me have to sit down because I was not prepared for the sound of an 81-year-old woman crying because someone had thought to include her. I wrote their names in a column on a blank document. Gloria, Ruth, Hazel, Mei Lin, Cecile. One more name came to me, Lorraine, my cousin who had been my bridesmaid, who had cared for her mother through dementia for 6 years without a single trip out of Alabama. 6 names. 6 women who had spent decades showing up for everyone else. I saved the document. Then I went back to the booking portal. I did not make any changes that night. I wanted to sleep on it first. Not because I was uncertain, but because I am the kind of woman who believes that the most important decisions deserve one night of silence before they are carried out. In the morning, I called my daughter. She picked up on the second ring, warm and cheerful, the way she gets when she is expecting forgiveness before it has been offered. I asked her one question. I kept my voice level. I asked whether Marcus's sister and her family had already been in contact with the cruise line. She hesitated. Then she said she thought so, yes, just to confirm their cabin preferences. I said, I see. Then I told her I loved her and hung up. I opened the laptop and logged into the portal. I was the sole account holder. No authorized users, no cosigners, no secondary billing contacts. The account was mine the way the deed to this house is mine, the way Robert's watch on my nightstand is mine. Completely and without negotiation. I clicked through to the account settings. There was a function called Booking Suspension, a single toggle. The description read, activating this setting will immediately suspend all reservation access and disable all linked billing authorizations pending account holder verification. All currently booked services will be placed in a hold status. No external parties may modify, confirm, or access reservations during suspension. I moved the toggle. A confirmation box appeared. I clicked yes. Then I went to the phone and called Pauline. I explained the situation without raising my voice. I told her I was the sole account holder, and I needed to fully cancel the existing booking and rebook under a new passenger manifest. She did not ask unnecessary questions. She has known me long enough to understand that when I speak in that particular calm, steady tone, it is not the moment to probe. She asked when I wanted to start the rebooking. I said today. Over the next 2 days, I did not respond to any messages from my daughter. She sent 3 texts, each slightly more urgent than the last. The first said, "Hey, just checking in." The second said, "Mom, Renee is asking about the cabin confirmation. Can you call the cruise line?" The third said, "This is getting weird. Can you please just let us know everything is okay?" Everything was okay. Just not for the people who expected it to be. I called Gloria first. She answered from the food pantry, and I could hear the sound of cardboard boxes in the background. I told her I was taking her on a cruise in 6 weeks, and that she did not need to bring anything except herself and one good dress for the formal dinner night. She said, "Dorothy." "What?" I said, "Caribbean. 7 nights. Balcony cabin for Cecile. Connecting rooms for the rest of us." She said, "Are you serious?" I said, "I am always serious, Gloria, you know that." Ruth cried. Hazel said she needed to sit down and then called me back 10 minutes later to say, "Yes, absolutely yes. When do I pack?" Mei Lin asked 3 times if there was a catch, and I told her the only catch was that she was not allowed to spend the whole trip talking about her patients. Lorraine drove up from Alabama the following Saturday just to hug me in person. "Cecile," when I called her, said Dorothy May, "your Robert always did say you were the one who knew how to love people right." I had to step outside onto the porch when she said that. The magnolia tree in the front yard was blooming, and the air smelled the way it does in April in Savannah, warm and green and full of something almost like hope. I spent the following 2 weeks rebuilding every detail of the trip. Pauline rebooked the same staterooms and the balcony cabin under the new passenger names. I arranged new flight connections from 3 different cities. I ordered a second set of luggage tags in a different color, burgundy and gold, and had them engraved with something that made Pauline pause when she read it back to me over the phone. I packed a framed photograph of Robert, the one from our anniversary dinner 7 years ago, where he is laughing at something I said, and his whole face is lit up from the inside. I wrapped it in a soft cloth and placed it carefully in my carry-on bag. At some point during that 2nd week, the calls from my daughter started. Not texts anymore. Calls. I let them go to voicemail the first day. By the 2nd day, her husband was calling too. By the 3rd, there was a voicemail with a different tone, lower, more controlled, where my daughter said, "Mom, I do not know what is happening, but Renee is saying the cruise line has no record of her reservation, and I really think there is some kind of mistake. Please, just call me back." I listened to that voicemail twice. Then I set the phone down and went to finish folding my clothes for the trip. There was one call I did take. It came from a number I did not recognize, and when I answered, it was my son-in-law Marcus. He did not begin with pleasantries. He said, "Dorothy, I know you're upset, but this has gotten out of hand. My sister flew in from Phoenix for this trip. She rearranged her whole schedule. If there is a problem with the booking, you should have said something instead of just going silent." I listened until he finished. Then I asked him one question. I asked whether he had paid for any portion of this cruise. A long pause. I waited. He said, "Well, we were planning to contribute once everything was confirmed." I said, "Marcus, the trip was booked, paid for, and confirmed 8 months ago. By me. In full. Under my name. With my retirement savings. And your sister was added to a passenger list I did not authorize and was never asked about." He said it was not supposed to be a big deal. I said, "I know." That was the whole problem. I wished him a good evening and ended the call. The day of departure was a Thursday. My daughter sent one final message the night before, and it was the most honest thing she had said through this entire ordeal. She wrote, "Mom, I know we messed this up. I know Renee was wrong and we should have talked to you first. But the kids are excited and the flights are booked, and I don't know what you did with the cruise reservation, but if you could just fix it, we can figure everything else out when we get back. I promise." Fix it. I read that word and thought about Robert in the garden. I thought about the pruning shears still in his hand. I thought about every lunch I skipped, every haircut I did without, every $200 deposit into that account that I made, alone, quietly, in the name of a promise I had made to a man who was no longer here to see it kept. I thought about the fact that my daughter had not once, in any of those texts or calls or voicemails, said the words, "I am sorry." I did not reply. I set the phone face down on the nightstand beside Robert's watch, and for the first time in 4 years, I slept through the entire night without waking once. We flew out the next morning, 6 women at the Savannah airport, and I will tell you that if you have never seen a group of women over 60 moving through a terminal with matching luggage tags and absolutely zero apology in their posture, you have missed something genuinely beautiful. Cecile wore a red hat with a wide brim that she had bought specifically for the occasion. Gloria had painted her nails the color of sea glass. Ruth carried a tote bag with the word "finally" written on it in iron-on letters because she said she had made it herself the night before and she did not care if it was tacky. It was not tacky. It was perfect. On the ship, when we walked into the staterooms and Cecile stepped out onto the balcony and stood at the railing and looked at the ocean for the first time in her 81 years, she did not say anything for a long time. Just stood there with her hands on the rail and the salt air moving through the white of her hair. Then she turned to me and said, "Dorothy, I wish I had more years left to do this again." I said, "Cecile, that is exactly why we are doing it now." We ate dinner that first night at a long table in the main dining room, and I placed Robert's photograph at the center of it the way I had always imagined, though the faces around it were not the ones I had originally planned. They were better. They were women who understood what it meant to have spent your life filling other people's cups and to sit, finally, at a table where someone had thought to fill yours. Hazel gave a toast that she had clearly rehearsed and was pretending she had not. Mei Lin ate an entire dessert course without apologizing for it, which she told us was the first time she had done so in at least a decade. Lorraine sang an old church song under her breath after dinner, not for anyone in particular, just because the mood moved her and there was no one present who would ask her to stop. Each night we gathered in the common room of our connecting staterooms and shared something. Not therapy, not testimony, just stories. The ones women carry for years without telling because there has never been a quiet enough room, an audience patient enough, a moment uncrowded enough to let them surface. Gloria talked about her marriage and the years she spent shrinking herself to fit inside it. Ruth talked about her youngest child and how she had learned, slowly, that love was not a guarantee of return. Hazel, who I had known for 20 years and thought I knew completely, told us about a painting she had started and abandoned in her garage, a landscape that had been unfinished for 11 years because she kept telling herself there was no point. I told them about Robert, about the travel magazines with folded corners, about the red pen circles around Caribbean routes, about the pruning shears. Nobody tried to comfort me with the wrong words. They just sat with me in the truth of it, the way women who have lived long enough to understand grief will do, which is to say, quietly and without trying to fix it. On the 5th night, we had our formal dinner. Cecile wore a yellow dress she had bought in 1987 and never had occasion for. She looked extraordinary. I wore the blue one Robert had always said made me look like I knew something the rest of the room did not. After dinner, we went up to the top deck. The stars were out in a way that does not happen on land, full and dense and low, like the sky had been turned inside out. The ocean was dark and enormous, and completely indifferent to anything any of us had ever worried about, which I found, unexpectedly, to be the most comforting thing I had felt in years. I brought the lavender candle I had packed without knowing exactly why. I set it in the center of the small table near the railing and lit it. The flame moved with the wind but did not go out. I said, "Robert, we made it." Nobody laughed. Nobody looked away. Gloria put her hand over mine on the railing. We stood there until the candle burned low, and the ocean kept moving the way it always had, the way it will long after all of us are gone, and I thought about how strange and clarifying it is to feel small in a way that does not diminish you, to stand at the edge of something so much larger than your own grief and understand that the grief is real and the ocean is also real, and both of these things can be true at the same time. I was not angry anymore. I was not waiting. I was not performing the role of a woman holding her feelings together with both hands so that no one else would be inconvenienced by the sound of them coming apart. I was simply there, present, seen, mine. The email from my daughter arrived the morning after we returned home. I saw it while drinking coffee on the porch, still carrying the scent of the ocean in my clothes, though I had already unpacked and washed everything. The subject line said, "Just wanted to reach out." I opened it. She wrote that she and Marcus had done some reflecting, and that the whole situation had gotten out of hand in ways that were not entirely her fault, but she could see now that communication had broken down, and that I had probably felt excluded. She said the kids had missed having me there. She said Renee had been difficult about the whole thing, and that she herself had been put in a hard position. She said she knew I had put a lot into the trip financially, and she wanted me to know that she appreciated it, and that if I was ever open to discussing it, she thought it might be fair to revisit the money that had been set aside for the original booking, since some of those funds had technically been earmarked for the family reunion, and perhaps there was a way to settle things equitably. Equitably. I set my coffee mug down. I read the email again, slowly, the way I used to read a patient's chart when something in the numbers did not add up, looking for the part where the apology was supposed to be, looking for the sentence that took responsibility without immediately distributing it across other people's behavior, looking for the words I should have heard months ago, the simple, unadorned ones. I was wrong. I am sorry. I should have treated you better. They were not there. What was there instead was the word equitably, a request dressed in the language of fairness. She wanted me to consider returning money to a trip she had tried to take without me, using funds I had saved and held and managed entirely on my own. I thought about Cecile in the yellow dress. I thought about Gloria's sea glass nails. I thought about Ruth's tote bag and Hazel's unfinished painting and Mei Lin allowing herself a whole dessert without apology for the first time in a decade. I thought about Lorraine singing in the stateroom because the room was finally quiet enough to hold the sound of her. I thought about Robert's photograph at the center of the dinner table, watching all of it. I closed the laptop without replying. I picked up my coffee and walked to the edge of the porch where the magnolia was still blooming, a little past its peak now, the petals going soft at the edges the way beautiful things do when they have held on long enough. I looked out at the yard where Robert's rosebush was coming back in again, new growth at the tips of the canes, small and insistent and entirely unbothered by the winter it had just survived. I had spent 4 years building something out of love and sacrifice, and a promise I had made in grief. I had built it carefully, privately, without complaint, and when it was taken from me without a word of acknowledgement, I had taken it back, not out of bitterness, out of the simple, clarifying knowledge that love is not a transaction, but it is also not a blank check. My daughter had made a choice. She had made it confidently, because she had counted on my silence the way all of us who love too quietly are eventually counted on. She had assumed that my kindness was the same thing as my permission, that my generosity was the same thing as my acceptance, that because I did not make a fuss I did not notice, and because I did not object out loud I did not mind. She had forgotten something Robert knew about me from the very beginning. I am quiet until I am not. I set my mug down on the porch railing and listened to the morning. The birds were loud and sure of themselves in the magnolia tree. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's dog was going on about something it considered important. The air was thick with April warmth, and the memory of salt water and the particular peace that comes not from resolution, but from release. I did not owe her a reply. I did not owe her an explanation. I did not owe her the money she was asking for, which had never been her money and had never been intended as a gift to fund an experience she had designed without me. What I owed myself was this: the recognition that I had kept the promise, not in the way I had imagined, not with the family I had built, but with the family I had chosen, the one that had formed itself around a dinner table on a ship in the middle of the Caribbean, with a photograph of a man who loved the ocean at its center. I had given the trip to people who understood what it meant to be given something, and in doing so, I had finally given something to myself. That afternoon, I went to the garage and found the number for a small art studio near Forsyth Park that offered classes for adults. I had been meaning to call for years. Robert used to say I had an eye for color and that I wasted it on beige walls. I signed up for a 6-week watercolor course starting the following month. I paid the registration fee with money from my regular account, not the family voyage fund, which I had decided to rename. I called Pauline and asked her to start looking at itineraries for next spring, Alaska this time. She said, "Are you taking the same group?" I said every last one of them, and add a name. My daughter from Alabama mentioned she has a friend who just lost her husband. "See if we have room." Pauline said she would check. I said, "Tell her the luggage tags are on me." That evening I sat in Robert's armchair with a cup of peppermint tea and his photograph in my hands, the one from the anniversary dinner with the lit-up laugh, and I talked to him the way I do sometimes, when the house is quiet and I need to say things out loud so they become real. I told him we made it to the water. I told him Cecile stood at the railing and looked at the ocean and I thought of him the whole time. I told him the rosebush was coming in strong this year and that I was going to learn to paint, which he would find funny, and I did not care. I told him that I had finally understood something he had tried to tell me for 33 years, which was that love given freely is a beautiful thing, but love given blindly is just a different kind of loneliness. Then I told him I was going to be all right. The candle on the side table burned low and then out. The room was dark and warm and full of the particular quiet that belongs to people who have finally set something heavy down after carrying it for longer than anyone should have had to carry it alone. I was not waiting for an apology. I was not holding space for a reconciliation that required me to pretend the wound had not been made. I was not diminishing what had happened in order to make someone else more comfortable with having done it. I was 64 years old and I had kept my promise, and I had sat at a table surrounded by women who had been forgotten by people who should have known better. And I had watched them remember themselves, and I had let myself be remembered too. I was not someone's footnote. I was not someone's safety net. I was not a wallet with a heartbeat or a resource to be allocated and then quietly set aside. I was Dorothy May Calloway, and I was finally, completely, irreversibly free.